It's lovely to see you all here at this stage in the term. Um, Beccie and myself are going to present really what was a research project around objective, critical and pluralistic RVE. But I think what's important for me to, or for us to note at the outset, is that this isn't a silver bullet in terms of this is what you should be doing. This is an explanation of our journey with a group of schools and individuals and some advisors that came to support us during the research. It's our journey, and it's exploring and explaining some of the reasoning behind the issues that we encountered, some of the very practical ways that people tried to staff in schools tried to challenge those issues and work through them, and also to say that, you know, everybody is very aware that this is very much set in the context of their schools. So this isn't a one-size-fits-all. It's not going to be a set of resources stroke case studies that will work for everybody. But I think what's important is that there'll be opportunities to have a look at them in more detail. And there may just be some little sparks, some nuggets that will help you to develop objective, critical and pluralistic RVE within your school and within your context. And I think that's really important that we just sort of frame the presentation around this. We haven't got all the answers. We realise that we're still very much on a journey with this, but it is so important that we all engage and, as Libby said, have that professional dialogue, you know, with one another. So I'm Liz Thomas. I'm Director of Education for the Church in Wales, which means that I look at all of the sort of policy and central government work. And, you know, through that work, I was very involved in the development of Curriculum for Wales, and was fortunate enough to work with Libby, Tanya, and I can see that Kathy is here on the call as well this afternoon in actually developing the national guidance for RVE. So I learned quickly from a background of non-specialism and history. I learned quickly under their excellent tutelage, but it was a real privilege to be involved in that. Beccie Morteo, who's going to be presenting the lion's share of our session today, is currently, and until the end of August, is currently the head of education for Llandaff Diocese. And she's done a huge amount of work with schools and with partners in terms of looking at how we develop RVE in our schools. I should say that when we say our schools, we feel that the resources that we are putting out there and the way that we're engaging, we are hopeful that they would be relevant in some way for all schools. So I think that's really important. But Beccie is our head of education for Llandaff Diocese. She's leaving us at the end of August to return to headship in school, so we're going to miss her, but I'm really delighted to be able to introduce her this afternoon. If I can just start with a little bit of background in terms of how we came to really start to engage with the idea about objective, critical and pluralistic. And it really comes very much from the development of the Curriculum for Wales. We were supported by Welsh Government to develop a set of guidance for Church in Wales schools. And it was really important that we followed the law, that we made sure that our guidance had regard for the national guidance. We think that's really hugely important. We wanted it to support our schools, but also we wanted it to be accessible for all schools. And we were able to have a little bit more leeway than perhaps the national guidance was, in that we were able to put together some exemplar materials that perhaps just gave a few initial pointers as to how we could approach the learning journeys and the sub-lenses and so on. So our guidance is available in Welsh and English on the Church in Wales website. It's open, and it's open to be used by all schools. So we'd encourage you to have a look at it. It's very clear what aspects are purely for Church in Wales schools, because we say, if you see what I mean. So there's a very clear guidance in terms of, for our voluntary aided schools, this is the extra bit, the additionality that you need to be doing. The guidance was developed by practitioners. We worked in the same way that the curriculum for Wales was developed. We worked with RVE leads and senior leaders in our schools, as well as some local experts and members of the Church in Wales education team in the diocese. So it was very much a collegiate approach, and we felt that that was really important. So the examples that are there are practical exemplar materials that have been developed by schools for schools. It's not necessarily, in terms of the guidance, it's not the resources that have just been magicked up by a small writing team. This has actually been developed already by those schools that were able to engage with this in the very early stages. So we found that actually, while we were writing, certain questions came to mind, certain things that we felt that we needed to address. So some of those were the likes of how we were going to work in social action and spirituality into the guidance, which would be more specific for our schools. But we also felt and could see from the conversations that there was a lot of nervousness, there was a lot of questioning around the idea of objective, critical and pluralistic RVE. And that seemed to be causing some consternation, not just with our writing team, but more widely within the RVE communities, and particularly at primary level. So we decided from there that we would actually approach questioning objective, critical and pluralistic RVE in the same way that we had our guidance. And the idea was that we would put a group together to actually look at this in a very practical, context-based way. Now, at that point, I've probably said too much, but I'm going to hand over to Beccie, who's going to talk you through how we moved from our religion, values and ethics guidance into the piece of research that, practical research that we're presenting this evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. Hi everyone, it's really nice to see you all. Nice to see some familiar names and faces in the group. Also adds a bit of pressure as I come as a non-specialist RE person, but someone with a really keen interest in what's happened over the last few years. So my background's in primary. I've led RVE in primary. When I reflect now, I could have done that a lot better had I had all this input that I have now. And I'm really excited about going back into school in September and looking at the RVE there. So just to reiterate what Liz says, we're not coming with, this is how to do it. We're coming with our experiences. I have the privileged position of working with 40 schools across South Wales and also advisors, and we're a team in the Church in Wales. We may work in different dioceses. I can see Jenny's on the call as well, but that's been a real privilege to really focus on this. So just to go a little bit further into our website, as Liz explained, it's there, it's open. We encourage all schools to look at it. And we have had some really positive feedback from we often say community schools. I would say our schools are community schools too, but sometimes it's just easier for reference. But from our community schools that have fed back that actually it's just given them some ideas and some ways forward. So within each section, there's the sub-lens guidance. It's not that different to what's on Hub, but it's just organised in a slightly different way, and some people find it a more helpful way for organising things. But what it does add is some ideas, and as Liz says, they're all practitioner-led. So again, this isn't us saying this is what you should do. This is us saying these are some examples of what schools have looked at and found have worked well for them. So as I said, they're suggestions. It's in no way a scheme, and we wouldn't want it to be used in that way. And the suggestions, what we found when we were putting this together, is they're not specific to one lens. They cover a variety of lenses, but again, that's a really positive approach to curriculum development in our view. We encourage that there's no hierarchy around which religion's taught first. It's dependent on what suits that context or what suits your school sometimes, because some of these contexts may be developed around what's right for your school. And we hope as time goes on that this will be added to, so it become more of a resource for our schools. And as Liz says, that's translated into Welsh too. So as Liz said, we work with lots of practitioners, work with head teachers, work with governors, and we work with RVE leads and teachers across our schools. And we were having some key questions raised with us quite consistently. Lots of teachers were concerned about what religion should I be teaching, how much of that religion should I be teaching, what aspects of that religion should I be teaching. That was the question that was coming up a lot. How much time to spend on each one, what proportion of the curriculum should we allocate to each religion. And also one of the key questions that we were having is, where do we start with non-religious philosophical convictions? For some of our schools, that was a new thing to look at. So we started to realise and discuss that schools really wanted just to have an open forum, to have some guidance, have some discussion around all of this. It came at a time as well when obviously there were significant curriculum changes, the ALN reform, there was a lot going on for schools. So we wanted to be as helpful as possible. Sorry, I've just missed the first activity. Just wondering if anybody within the group, and you can add it halfway through, had any similar questions to this, or if you're part of a SACRE or a SAC that is being asked similar questions along this line, or you're an advisor and there are consistent questions around the same theme coming to you. It would just be interesting to have some of those in the chat to see if that's similar across Wales. So the next step for us was to look at how we could put together this group, and the Church in Wales were able to allocate some funding, but we were also lucky enough to benefit from a Culham St Gabriel's grant. I'm sure lots of you will have engaged with them as a trust, and the process is they're very supportive with the process. So if you did want to consider some sort of research or some sort of group work or individual support for looking at RVE, it's something that you can access, and it's something that is really guided through the process. So you can contact them and they will help you. So we were able to access funding from that to look at this overarching question of, what does objective, critical and pluralistic look like? Not to spoil the ending, but we don't have the answer to that. I just want to manage expectations there. As Liz says, we've definitely got some ideas and some conversations going on and some experiences, but it's a big question. And I think it's going to take a lot more work looking at these areas for people to be confident with this aspect of the curriculum. So the group was put together. There was an invitation to all of our schools to put themselves forward for the group. We were really keen that this was a Wales-wide group, so we ensured that there was funding for travel for colleagues to Cardiff. We also engaged with local advisors, so Hayley and Donna from EAS and CSC, and there was some funding accessed from them as well to enable other colleagues to join us. We had secondary representatives and we had a range of schools, which was brilliant. We also had community schools join us. So we really did have a wealth of knowledge in the room. We had people who were handed RVE and told they were going to lead it that year, who were slightly nervous about what they were going to do. We had people that had been leading RVE in their school for many years. We had head teachers who were juggling leading RVE with running a school. It was a really diverse group, and that's what made it so great. And I think one of the main feedbacks from that group was that time to share together was so important, and the questions that were asked, the discussions that took place, and the ideas that were brought forward almost across the board. It wasn't necessarily the main aim of the group, but almost across the board, that support from colleagues who are working in schools in Wales, who understand the context of our curriculum and understand the main aims and objectives behind our curriculum. That support for each other was key. So, you know, any opportunity, I would say, to be involved in a network or a group of practitioners that really understand the curriculum development, I would highly recommend to anybody. So the aims of the project, I won't read them, they're up on the screen for you. I would say there are some of these that we didn't fully meet. And I think, you know, most projects, when you're starting out, you have high expectations. So, for example, do we have a common understanding of what objective, critical and pluralistic RVE might look like in a primary classroom in Wales? I think we're starting to have an understanding of that. It's not a finished product. But I would say certainly with regards to engaging with professionals in Wales, I'll come on to that in a minute, but that was a highlight for us. And I think moving forward, that's something, again, we would really encourage our schools to do. We have a wealth of knowledge and expertise in Wales. People, again, who understand the curriculum development. Liz, you mentioned, you know, being part of a group that works on that development. So understand what that looked like from the beginning, to engage with those people and to take that advice. So then moving on to an activity in a breakout room. This is one of the first things we did as a group, so I think this would be a useful activity to do. I understand that there's people within the group here that were in the group, the RVE group, so there'd be a different approach there. But I wonder, as a group, could you have a go at defining what you think pluralism would look like within RVE in a primary classroom? There's no correct answer, or the answer would be slightly different, but if we take a bit of time to do that.
Without wanting to pounce on anybody, would anybody like to share part of their discussion from their group or their view? You can tell us which group you were in, etc. But it would be wonderful to just hear what this might look like from your point of view within a primary school classroom.
Yeah, just about the time restrictions for planning, really, I think was coming through. I think there's a really good understanding. The person mostly that was kind of giving their examples was secondary and just talking about the challenges there. But I do think for all teachers, it's about having time to plan. It's the enthusiasm is there for the pluralistic approach. I think I'm right. Am I, Kathy, do you think?
Yeah, completely. I think there's a real desire to teach pluralistically, and I think there's a real understanding of what it means as well. The issue is having the resources and the time to put it together so that it can then be delivered. Because there's so many great ideas out there that, I mean, some of them were coming out in our session, and they were secondary based but relate equally to primary, about the sorts of things people want to do and the different worldviews that they want to explore, along with the main religions that they already have a lot of resources for and already know a lot about. But to stretch into that newer area and look at things in that more pluralistic manner is difficult, because the resources just aren't there. And if you don't have specialist teachers in secondary, and you don't have the curriculum or the syllabus time to deliver it, then that's going to be a problem. So it's not the understanding of pluralism or the will, it's the time and the resources.
Yeah, and I think it seemed to be more time because the ideas were fantastic and so creative. And as this is such a creative curriculum, it would be lovely, wouldn't it, to be able to enable teachers with time
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things, Jenny, that our network sort of touched on a bit, because it did allow people those days to be out and discussing. I mean, arguably they need a lot more time again, but we started to touch on that, and that is really interesting. I do wonder though as well is, you know, we're all in this group and people have signed up to this because we have a real strong interest in RVE. And I do reflect on maybe colleagues in our schools who don't have the same confidence and don't have the same opportunities to engage in things. So it's a really interesting one, but it's really good to hear that that want is there and that understanding of pluralistic approaches. Was there anyone else that wanted to feedback anything?
Hi, I sort of gave my experience of being at secondary, and it just as the group have said, it would be nice to be able to do things a little bit more pluralistic and to look at more non-religious things, but from a sort of personal experience, it's restrictions within timetable, blended with humanities, but it would be really interesting, I think, to see what's happening in our feeder primary schools, and if I work closely with Libby, and she helps us a lot up here in Wrexham, but if, you know, if there's a conversation that wants to be had, then we can definitely sort of do that in our area. Got some friends in the feeder primaries, especially in the Welsh cluster. It'll be nice to see what they're doing, so we know where we can go in the secondary.
Yeah, and again, we had secondary colleagues in our group, and one of their main takeaways was what, you know, an immense amount of learning from the primary colleagues, you know, vice versa, but, you know, they really took that away. And one of the projects that we did start to touch on was a possible transition project for the year sixes in the local cluster, based around a very open question that included elements of RVE, but from that sort of inquiry approach that could be part of cluster transition approach. There's a bit of work that would need to go into that, but that would be a wonderful funded group, and I'm sure that's something, you know, if you were looking for sort of time out of class, it always requires funding, you know, that could be applied for with Culham St Gabriel's, for example, but I think that would be a really interesting piece of work.
Yeah, thank you. Something I'll look into, definitely.
Yeah, I'm not saying that you have to do it all, Amy.
No, but it's definitely, and I know me and Libby, we've spoken briefly about stuff, but yeah, it would be nice to see what they know. You tend to have that they maybe have not done anything, and then they've got a lot of knowledge on festivals, for example, but maybe nothing that you'd expect to have. So it's just knowing where we need to go on that learning journey, I guess. And the focus on skills. It's, you know, the skills that we need to teach them, and then applying the content to that then to help them do that.
And I've just seen Libby write your name down with a note to say, so that's it now. Thank you, it's really helpful.
Yeah, don't worry, Amy. We'll in our next meeting we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Heather, did you have something to input?
I wasn't sure whether Louise had her hand up before me.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, that's fine if you want to go ahead.
Oh, we were just talking about starting points. Once we sort of ironed out what pluralism was, we stopped about starting points, and we said about the importance of demographic and starting where you are within your cnefin, as it were, you know, within the classroom and the school, etc., and looking at, you know, depth rather than just sort of studying anything and everything that you could. It's important to look at what meaningful learning is with regards to developing that sort of spiral approach to learning within the school and taking into account their demographic.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And I think that is the beauty of our curriculum. And I think possibly why I'm emphasising all the time about how engagement with specialists and colleagues that understand the curriculum development is so important. And you mentioned that spiral. It's so important because if we're expecting children to have conversations, they have to have that bank of knowledge and understanding before they can have those conversations. So, Yeah, really good point. Thank you. Louise?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I was actually going to make a very similar point. I was coming from a SAC perspective in terms of the importance of the locally agreed curriculum, and therefore, you know, in many senses, the locally agreed demographics and the importance of that. And I think one of the teachers mentioned about taking account of the religious background of the children, actually, and their beliefs, and looking at things in more depth rather than, and the problems I think the teachers were saying about fitting it all in, and you know, the problems of the curriculum and so forth. So I think actually what I was going to say very much mirrors what Heather says, but I mean, perhaps Tyler from a teacher's perspective might want to add to that. I don't know. Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, that's okay. No, you summarized it really well. I think we all get it. We all know what we need to do, but it's finding the time. And it was really interesting to hear some of the primary colleagues and sort of their challenges that they're facing, because obviously I'm secondary. So yeah, sorry, not much to add.
No, that's great. Thanks both. And I think for us as a group, that's why it was quite important to discuss what we meant by pluralistic. And actually, obviously there's definitions, and we can look at a couple now, and it really is, once you start looking into it, you could go on for days, because there are lots of different aspects and ways of looking at it. But as a school community, you know, what are your expectations around that, and what's your starting point for developing pluralistic approaches? Everybody's will be slightly different. But having that sort of definition as a school around your expectations or your vision for that, I suppose, can be a really handy activity. Thank you, everyone, for feeding back. It was a slow start, but we got there. Right. So just back to listening to me, I'm afraid. So some of the definitions around pluralism that we looked at, I won't go into all of them, they're there to read, but I quite like the respect for the otherness of others around that as well. And I remember actually having a conversation with a colleague around the word tolerate, which isn't one of my favourite words, if I'm honest. Tolerate, it's not something that I, you know, really would like to use, but I think there are some really interesting discussions around how we use that with when there are people whose views don't align with ours, or we have very different aspects, about how we can do that in a really respectful way. So that's another interesting conversation around some of the language there. So to go back to the work we did as a group, we met together in Cardiff, teachers from each of the dioceses, as I said, Central South and EAS advisors, which again, I have to say was so beneficial, because it was really linking up some of our work there. And as I said, we also had additional funded places, which was great. So we ended up with 6 Church and Wales schools, 5 community schools, although I always say I'd argue Church and Wales schools are community schools, 4 advisors from across Wales. So our first meeting, we outlined the project, we reviewed our current practice, we spent quite a lot of time doing that, which was really helpful. And then we discussed the meaning of objective, critical and pluralistic. During that meeting, we also had some input from Father Dean. I'll come on to that a bit more later. Then step 3, we met again, we shared our ideas on research, and we fed back on initial thoughts. And then at that point, we had more input from another advisor, Mark Bryant again. I'm sorry, I've missed a sentence out there, but we can provide any links around that work as well, which I'll go on to in a minute. And then after that meeting, we realised that we needed to sort of review some of the focuses that the group were having. So we had an online check-in, and we had some of those one-to-one conversations. We were finding it really useful as a group to discuss our practice, our current practice in school, but we were finding it hard to move on to thinking outside of that current practice and trying new things. And I think really that's because there was just an overwhelming amount of information and we just needed to refine that. So we found that really helpful. And then in our final meeting, we reviewed progress. We discussed being brave and really trying something different. And then we had opportunity for feedback as well. And also Kathy, who's on the call tonight, she came and inputted into our session as well. So that was the sort of format of the group. I think one of the main takeaways from people as well, as I keep mentioning, sorry, but was that input that we had from advisors and specialists. So Father Dean Atkins is a Church and Wales vicar that his church is in Butetown in Cardiff. So he would very much say he is Butetown, not Cardiff Bay, but you may recognise the area as Cardiff Bay as well. Dean is really integrated into the community. He does a lot of interfaith work. He really understands his community. He lives and breathes his community work. He's developed a walk called Faithful Butetown. So we took that walk with him as a group, and it was simply using the local area and the resources in that area. You may have seen on one of the slides, the Betty Campbell statue in Cardiff. So discussing why Betty was so important to Cardiff, discussing that history, and then a walk through Butetown, through the different places of worship, the different statues, pointing out the different aspects of the history and the culture and the diversity in Butetown. And of course, that included his church as well. But it was a real, we had really positive feedback about that day because it was very simple. It was using the local area, but it was really relying on that expertise that we do have in Wales and in our local areas. So that was our first input from an advisor or specialist. Then we had Mark Bryant, who came to speak to us. I first engaged with Cardiff University around some professional development for myself on teaching Islam in secondary schools. It was a challenge for me, who's primary based, but it was really interesting. And that drew my attention to the work Mark and his team have done around supporting teachers with the teaching of Islam by using Muslim voices in Wales, of young people in Wales. And he has a carousel of videos that can support schools which use the voices of people in Wales. So Mark's a really excellent person to link up with around that. And then Kathy came in and spoke to us all. It was really a really positive meeting. And I'm not just saying that because Kathy's on the call, but it was a really open conversation. I think there was some nervousness with colleagues as to, are we doing everything right with regards to non-religious philosophical convictions? And Kathy was there really just to assure us that, you know, go through the questions with us, talk a little bit about things like language and encourage us to use terms such as faith and beliefs to be inclusive in our general teaching. And again, point us in the direction of resources and the opportunity to invite speakers into our schools who go through a training process and to signpost us to that. So those three different aspects gave a real taste, I think, to schools about how they can access support that's appropriate for their schools. And then I just want to go through one of our example case studies at the end. So each school had a particular focus, and that was particular to their school context as appropriate. One of our schools, I'm not going to say which school it is because we're still developing the website. They will be available in September. Well, I say September, we have to make sure they're fully translated. But in the autumn term, they will be available to read through. And it's completely different, each one. Each person is coming from a different angle. They may be a specialist. This person in particular, it was from one of our community schools, and they were just starting out with leading the RVE. But the case study brought some really wonderful things into their school. So again, I won't read it out, it's there on screen for everyone to see, but just to pull out some aspects of it. it was a real going back to basics about where RVE sat in the school, how it could be taught, what could be standalone, what might be delivered as one-off events. So they really pulled everything back. And then you can see the extraordinary amount of pluralistic work that went into that school, and just having that umbrella of a question and looking at all different aspects, different religions, different approaches under that umbrella. Again, I won't go through everything with you, but you can see how they use speakers to come into school. They use different stories. They looked into different opportunities, and it just, everything sort of came together, but with context and meaning for the children. So again, it was nothing groundbreakingly different, but it was just a really different approach for that school, looking at all the opportunities they could to make things more pluralistic. And for them, they had some really interesting impacts. I think there was some, not reluctance, that's the wrong word, but some lack of confidence, maybe, the teaching of RVE. And I think once the teachers realised a new approach and how they could weave that through the curriculum, there was a lot more confidence and a lot more engagement. I think things such as looking at diversity within Christianity was something they really focused on. So they looked at engagement from lots of different Christian groups within their local context, again, making it relevant to their children in their school, in their context, but drawing on those links. But they also, as I said, brought in speakers from different visitors, and I think that was really eye-opening for the staff and the children. So as I said, in the autumn, there'll be a variety of those case studies online. If you have a spare 10 minutes, as I'm sure we all have, then please do have a look at them, have a read through. And it may just be that there's a few ideas within there that actually is helpful for your school. As Liz said at the beginning, we're not giving an answer here, we're just giving experiences of colleagues that are in schools and doing this themselves. So if we could pop back into breakout rooms again, please. And if we could just have a think, and I understand that some of us may not be working within a school context, but it may be something that we've seen or that we've heard about or we have experience of. But I wonder if you could have a discussion around a project, a unit of work or a lesson that really exemplifies the pluralistic approach you'd like to take in school. It would be lovely if we could have a bit of feedback then from that into the group, although we won't put anyone on the spot, we promise.
I had a really nice conversation with our NQT geography teacher today and scribbled some stuff down. It was something we talked about for doing this year, but it didn't really happen, timings and whatnot. But what we'd like to do as more of a blended humanities unit this time next year is an environment, and the idea of looking after Wales, our local area, but obviously from an RVE point of view. We'd look at what is stewardship, we'd look at maybe charities, we'd look at Christian humanist, why it's important to look after our environment, our world, our planet. And then Jenny said it fits really nicely, you know, the sublenses and things like that. So it's definitely something work in progress. We've got an idea. Obviously I have to think of the RVE curriculum, but we've got to be kind for the geography and history. It was the history part I think we're going to struggle with to bring into that, but we will. Social studies and business will sort of creep in naturally. But I would really like, I've wanted to bring in environment for a while, which lends itself nicely to pluralistic and sort of citizenship and the new curriculum and the 4 purposes and things like that. So the geography teacher she's got something already. We can just pop in some RV stuff and ask history what they want us to say on their behalf as well. So yeah, that's the dream for next year.
Well, that sounds great. Thank you, Amy. And I think that's an area that a few of our schools have looked at and found some like really rich sort of context based resources around that. So I'm sure there'll be lots of exciting things you can pull into that. Thank you. Tyler?
Yeah, I was saying in our group about having sort of like lines of inquiry or bigger themes. So like I planned a topic in my old school about governance. So like whether religion governs society or our lives. And we looked at like lots of different religions. So it was very pluralistic. So we looked at like Islam and like wearing the hijab. And then we looked at Sikhism and wearing the turban. And we looked at food laws, so kosher, halal. And then we looked at like the influence of Christianity on the laws. And then we looked at Sharia law. Which is like really interesting because you're like bouncing back and forth and you know you're bringing all these things in, but then I think the danger of that is that you sometimes lose like the depth in comparison to just learning about like each religion in depth. So I know there's an argument between like thematic and just teaching straight like religion, but I really enjoyed that. And when I was initially given the theme of governance, I was annoyed because I didn't have anything on governance, and I was like, oh, I've got to plan something new. But it turns out it's now my favorite thing. So
Brilliant. That sounds really interesting. Secondary is not my expertise, but hearing about things like that going on in schools, I just find really inspiring. And you're absolutely right. And I think a lot of our primary schools have found they need to balance some of that thematic with some discrete teaching, but they've done what works for them in their setting. But that sounds really interesting. Thanks, Tyler. Heather?
So I just shared with the group something. I'm not out of the classroom now, but something that I did as a head of RE. I'm secondary, I'm afraid, rather than primary, so apologies for that. Was to look at sort of the complementarity of science and religion. So starting points looked at diversity within Christianity and looking at the scriptural texts. So we had, you know, liberal, fundamentalist, and conservative views on that. And then we looked at non-religious philosophical convictions, such as that taken by Richard Dawkins on anti-theist opposition to religion and having any impact on science, etc. And then we also looked at other worldviews on creation itself, you know, particularly from the project. It's called The Big Questions now. I can't remember what it used to be called, where you did interviews with professors who took a religious stance on creation, but from a different worldview, and then building on that, looking at how that linked later on then with philosophical convictions, such as philosophical arguments, such as teleological argument, cosmological argument, etc. And that was a platform for learning for Key Stage 4 and then Key Stage 5 in the religious studies GCSE and A level. It's challenging to do that, but it brings in pluralism, and it also is a challenge in their critical thinking and understanding and interpretation of text, etc. Within, you know, it was a way of helping pupils understand that there are different views from within, you know, different religions, which either do oppose science or can be complemented by science, or can enhance, you know, a scientific understanding. So we looked at things like the anthropic principle and the aesthetic principle, etc., and married that with our understanding of, is it special to be human, with regards to evolution, etc. And we did that in year 9, but that was you know, sort of the start of a spiral learning for year 10, 11, 12 and 13 as well, but bringing in pluralistic approaches to that.
Wow, that sounds pretty incredible. I'm quite blown away by that. And I think, you know, I think our schools are so lucky to have such dedicated professionals that attend in meetings like this outside of school hours, but really, you know, wanting to create the best curriculums for their school and their children. And it's just so lovely to hear about all those wonderful things. So thank you. I am going to finish very quickly because I realise it's the last week of term, and well, sorry, I just want to double check no one else wanted to say anything. No, okay, I don't think I've missed anyone. And I'm sure people would appreciate finishing 5 minutes early. So I'll just share the screen one last time. There we go. And just really a few little top tips from us. And again, this is just our learning from this whole project and things that have been fed back to us. So I think one of the things that came out strongly, especially when we had advisors in, was to really think about carefully about language and phrases we used. And I've been working with a lot of my schools around this, and I don't think it's anything people are doing purposefully. They're just maybe slipped into habits, and really trying to encourage schools to use faith and belief. Really trying to encourage schools to use phrases such as "some Christians may believe," so we're not making sweeping assumptions about a religion. And they're really simple things, but actually it's a first step for professional development within a primary school. That's a really good step to talk around language we're using and how that can be more inclusive. Engaging, I think I might have mentioned this a couple of times tonight, but engaging with your RVE advisors and practitioners in Wales. And what I've been saying to lots of my schools is you don't need to be a specialist. There are the specialists in Wales to help you. Please reach out to us, reach out to your local authority, your SAC. There are people that can point you in the right direction. So, don't be too overwhelmed by RVE. There is that support there, but, considering whether that's the right support for you in your school. Church in Wales support, I've got to do a plug for the Church in Wales. It's for all schools. Our website is open for all schools. We're really committed to an inclusive, pluralistic approach for RVE. It's something I know Liz feels strongly about. We as advisors really support. We want to see high quality RVE lessons in our school. Consider becoming a member of your local SACRE or SAC as they're now known. I've learned a great deal by being involved in that network. If you're a teacher, it is a bit of time out, but it's not a significant amount of time. And I think what you can bring back into school from it is really worthwhile. There are some online groups to support, and there's specific ones. I know Donna, I don't know if she does it under pseudonym, so she wouldn't want me to, but there is a specific one in South Wales that Donna signposts, Donna is the advisor in Central South Consortium in South Wales. So she will signpost consistently things specific to Wales. So, engage in those. Again, we've mentioned it a lot, but engage with your local community and understand your context in your local community, but also that understanding that we're part of a wider community in Wales. I always use the example of Bute Town. I think people across Wales can link back to Bute Town in some way, just due to its history and the shipping aspect and the coal links as well. So, use that knowledge that's out there. And I think, we all wouldn't be here tonight if we weren't championing this sort of inclusive approach. And, really, when you look at what being an ethical informed citizen is, RVE is just key to that. And as we discussed earlier, having that knowledge and that understanding and that tolerance or respect for different views or the otherness of others is a key part of being an ethical informed citizen. So really champion that in your school. So those are our sort of top tips from this. And just finally, just some of the areas that people from our group are now focusing on. So non-religious philosophical convictions. Jenny, I know Amira in North Wales has been doing a lot of that and sharing with colleagues as well, which has been lovely. Many of our schools, and it's something the Church in Wales are in partnership with the sanctuary groups around, look at Schools of Sanctuary. As a project, it's a wonderful project. It includes many aspects of the RVE curriculum. Your local authority should be able to support you with that. If not, ask them why they're not supporting a sanctuary approach, because Wales is a nation of sanctuary. But we're able to support with that too, if you've got any questions around that. But I would really highlight that as a really lovely project. Well, it's not a project, it's more than that, but a way of bringing the RVE within your school. The Church in Wales developed a project a few years ago now called Taith Advent, which has been used by Schools of Sanctuary, which is an Advent project based around a book and the concept of people seeking sanctuary and refugee education, which many of our schools have used really successfully. A lot of our schools now are looking at how they develop spirituality, including godly play and prayer spaces. But most of our schools, I would say, are focusing on their curriculum mapping and their next steps with that. And on that note, I will stop there. So I hope that's just given you a flavour of what we did as a group. And, you know, I think I don't need to encourage this with you as a group, because I know that's why you're here. But the positives of working within a network, sharing practice, having that support from colleagues, it's been more than beneficial to many of us working as advisors, as teachers, as leaders in our schools. And we're very grateful to have had the opportunity. So thank you, everyone.
Oh, thank you so much, Becky. We really appreciate all the time and effort that has been put into not just the project itself, but also to prepare what you've prepared tonight so that you can present it to us in this seminar. So thank you for that, and thank you to Liz as well for all your hard work. We really do appreciate it. I'm sure we've all found it useful in some way or other, and can take back from what you've presented today and the discussions that we've had today. We can take those back to our settings, whether that's a SAC or school or whatever it is. If anyone has any further questions, feel free to contact myself, and I can pass those questions on to Becky or Liz if I can't answer them myself, if they're specific to this presentation, or anything else that, you know, if something that you're not sure of or just would like some more information about, do let us know. And the WASICA, so when you receive the link for this presentation, it's from the WASICA email address, so you can use that email address to get in touch with us. So yeah, just to reinforce what Becky said about, you know, remember that you've got a local SAC and a local RVE advisor. If you struggle to find out how to contact them, again, you can contact me to find out how you can get in touch with them, and I'll put you in touch with them. So thank you ever so much, everybody. Thank you for your contributions. Thank you for your time. I hope you all have an amazing summer and well-deserved break. And hopefully I'll see you again soon.